On the 7th of October 2007, a rookie leading the Formula One World Championship drove into the pit lane at Shanghai and got his car stuck in a gravel trap. He had started the day 12 points clear with 2 races left. He had qualified on pole. He had led most of the afternoon. He did not finish. 3 weeks later, he lost the World Championship by a single point. Formula One has spent 19 years telling that story as a lesson about youth. The rookie cracked. The pressure got him. He was too young to close it out. That version is wrong, and the evidence has been in plain view the entire time. What follows is what actually happened, and why it matters that a 19-year-old is currently leading this championship by 50 points. Lewis Hamilton arrived in Formula One in 2007, carrying a level of expectation that was, at the time, considered faintly ridiculous. A driver McLaren had backed since he was 13, who had won more or less everything on the way up, and who was being placed in his debut season alongside the reigning double world champion. Fernando Alonso had just beaten Michael Schumacher twice. He had signed for McLaren on the general understanding that he would be the team's driver in the way that returning champions usually are. The convention was clear enough. A rookie is supported, a champion leads. Hamilton finished on the podium in his first 9 races. He won in Canada. He won in America the week after. By midsummer, he was leading the World Championship, ahead of the double champion, in the same car, and this is what gets lost in the retelling. He was not a lucky rookie having a good run. He was the story of the season, by a distance. Alonso was not being inconvenienced by circumstance. He was being beaten, which is where the trouble starts, because a team built around a returning champion does not adjust gracefully to discovering that the other car is quicker. The first visible crack came in May. Hamilton arrived at Monaco leading the championship, 2 points ahead of his teammate. The McLarens were so much faster than anything else that afternoon that the race was effectively over by the first pit stop. Alonso won it. Hamilton finished 4 seconds behind him. And during the race, with a comfortable margin over the field, the team told both its drivers to slow down and bring the cars home. Afterwards, Hamilton said he had wanted to race. The FIA opened an investigation into whether McLaren had breached the ban on team orders. It cleared them completely. The governing body accepted that the strategy calls had been made to protect Hamilton from a possible safety car. The team had fueled him longer and pitted him early precisely so a neutralization could not cost him second place. Telling drivers with a large lead to slow down, the FIA noted, is ordinary team management. So on the regulations, McLaren were entirely in the clear. But something else had been established that afternoon, and it had nothing to do with the rulebook. The rookie had finished second to the champion. He had not been happy about it, and he had said so where everyone could hear. From there, the season stopped being a contest between teams and became a contest inside one. By August, it had stopped resembling a rivalry, and this is the part of the story that usually gets told from one side only, so take it in order. McLaren had an agreement for the final part of qualifying. The drivers would swap positions in the queue during the fuel burn phase, and on this occasion, Hamilton was to let Alonso through. He did not. Then, at the end of his own pit stop, Alonso sat stationary in the McLaren box. He stayed there. Hamilton was queued behind him, waiting to leave for his last run. And by the time the road cleared, there was not enough time left in the session for him to start a flying lap. Alonso took pole. The stewards gave him a 5-place grid penalty, dropping him to 6th. and McLaren were stripped of their constructors' points for the race entirely. So, one driver ignored an instruction. The other blocked him for it. The team was penalised for both. McLaren's own team principal at the time later said plainly that Hamilton had not cooperated. That is not a rivalry, and it is not a story with a villain in it. It is a team that had lost the ability to make its two drivers do anything at all. And the rookie's season was not a straight line either. 3 weeks before Hungary, at the Nürburgring, Hamilton crashed heavily in qualifying. A wheel failure at high speed that put him into the barriers hard enough that he was taken to hospital for checks. He was past fit and started the race. Then it rained, so suddenly and so hard that 6 cars went off at the same corner by the 3rd lap. Hamilton was one of them. He was craned back onto the circuit, rejoined, and finished 9th. Alonso won the race. His 9-podium run had ended at Silverstone. His championship lead was shrinking. And the story that this was a procession for a generational talent was by the middle of the summer no longer true. He was leading, but he was leading a fight. And underneath all of it, running the length of the season, was the case that became known as Spygate. It started with a photocopier. In the summer of 2007, the wife of McLaren's chief designer took a document into a copy shop in Surrey. The clerk behind the counter happened to be a Ferrari enthusiast, and he recognized the confidential markings on the pages coming out of his machine. He telephoned Maranello. The document ran to 780 pages. Wind tunnel data, test reports, drawings of the 2007 Ferrari, budgets. It had come from a senior Ferrari mechanic who felt he had been overlooked. The World Motorsport Council heard the case on the 26th of July. Its finding was that McLaren had been in possession of another team's confidential information, but that there was insufficient evidence to prove they had used it. No penalty. The season carried on. 10 days later came Hungary. The pit box, the grid penalty, a relationship inside McLaren that had passed the point of repair. On the morning of the Hungarian Grand Prix, Ron Dennis and Fernando Alonso had a confrontation. In the course of it, Alonso indicated that he was aware of emails relating to the Ferrari material. Dennis telephoned Max Mosley, the president of the FIA, and told him what his own driver had said. That call reopened the case. The council reconvened in Paris on the 13th of September, now holding the emails, and sat for the best part of 10 hours. The finding was carefully worded. McLaren had not incorporated Ferrari's data into their car, but possession of the material had conferred a significant sporting advantage. For that, McLaren were fined $100 million and excluded from the Constructors Championship entirely. It remains the largest fine in the history of the sport. The drivers kept their points and stayed in the fight for the title because they had cooperated with the investigation and supplied evidence against their own team. So consider what McLaren were carrying into the closing races: the largest fine in the history of the sport, expulsion from one of the 2 championships, a team principal who had reported his own driver to the governing body, 2 drivers who had given evidence against the organization employing them, and a rookie in front who needed all of that to make clean decisions under pressure. That is the context for what happened next. It is not background. It is the cause. 2 weeks after the hearing, Formula One went to Japan, and to the worst conditions the sport had seen in years. Fuji Speedway was under low cloud and continuous rain. Free practice was abandoned. Race control took one look at the standing water and decided the race could not be started conventionally at all. The field would run behind the safety car until somebody judged it survivable. That took 19 laps. The cars queued up in the spray for more than half an hour before anybody was permitted to race. Hamilton had taken pole, 0.07 of a second ahead of Alonso. When the safety car finally came in, he simply drove away from everybody. Ferrari had started on the wrong tires and were out of contention within a lap. Alonso, behind his teammate and unable to match him, went off on lap 41 and hit the wall hard enough to end his race. Hamilton won it. Pole, victory, fastest lap, in the wettest race of the year, at a circuit nobody on the grid had raced at before. He left Japan leading the championship by 12 points with 2 races remaining. And this is the part of 2007 that almost every retelling leaves out. Kimi Räikkönen was not a bystander who inherited a championship because 2 McLaren drivers made mistakes. At the September hearing, he had been 18 points behind Hamilton with 4 races left, and by any ordinary reading of the arithmetic, he was finished. He then won in Belgium. He finished 3rd at Fuji. He won in China. He won in Brazil. 3 victories in the final 4 races of the season. Hamilton did lose the 2007 championship, but somebody also won it, and he did it by taking 3 of the last 4 races in a car that had been the second quickest on the grid for most of the year, round 16 of 17. Hamilton led Alonso by 12 points and Räikkönen by 17 under a system that awarded 10 for a win. The mathematics were almost trivial. Finish ahead of Alonso and the championship was over with a race to spare. He took pole. It rained. He led. Then the track started to dry. His intermediate tires were built for a wet surface. On a drying one, they wore at a rate that is difficult to overstate. Räikkönen behind him in a Ferrari that had always been kinder to its rears closed a 4-second gap and went past. Hamilton stayed out. His right rear was worn through to the canvas in places. He stayed out. He was called in on lap 31, and the pit lane, unlike the racing line, had not dried. On tires with nothing left and a visor smeared with grime, he came into a curve he could not read, slid wide, and put the car into the gravel at walking pace. No contact, no speed, no damage. A car sitting in the stones with its wheels spinning, and a world championship going with it. Räikkönen won the race. Afterwards, McLaren's team principal Ron Dennis was asked why they had not brought Hamilton in earlier. His answer was that the team had not been racing Räikkönen. They had been racing Alonso. Räikkönen winning, with Hamilton second, would have been perfectly acceptable. Read that as a strategic position, and it is defensible. Read it as a description of what that team had become, and it explains the entire season. The decision not to pit was the team's. The tires were the team's. The rookie's contribution was to slide gently at the end of a sequence that had already gone wrong. Hamilton said afterwards that he did not leave his hotel room for 2 days. 3 weeks later at Interlagos, it was still his to lose. 4 points ahead of Alonso. 7 ahead of Räikkönen. He qualified second. Räikkönen jumped him at the start. Alonso forced past into the second corner. Hamilton, going for the place back, outbraked himself and slid wide, dropping to 8th. That was the first 60 seconds. On lap 7, the gearbox lost drive, and the McLaren slowed almost to a standstill on the circuit. The team talked him through a reboot. It worked. By the time the car was running properly, he was 18th. He then drove one of the great recovery drives of the era, and it was not enough. He finished 7th. Räikkönen won the race and the championship with 110 points. Hamilton and Alonso finished on 109 each. 1 point, 2 drivers in the fastest car on the grid, separated from a world championship by the smallest margin the sport has ever produced. Except that it did not actually end there, and this is the part almost nobody remembers. After the race in Brazil, the FIA's own technical delegate filed a report. He had found that the BMW, Sauber and Williams cars had been running fuel below the minimum permitted temperature, a breach of the regulations identified by the governing body's own official, not by anybody at McLaren. The stewards examined it and took no action. Look at where those cars finished. Rosberg 4th, Kubica 5th, Heidfeld 6th, Hamilton 7th. If those 3 had been excluded from the results, Hamilton would have been promoted to 4th. 4th place would have given him enough points to win the World Championship. McLaren appealed. The FIA's International Court of Appeal convened in London on the 15th of November, 6 weeks after the season had finished, with the World Championship in question. The appeal was rejected as inadmissible. The results stood. Raikkonen remained champion. Ron Dennis said afterwards that Raikkonen had deserved the title and that nobody at McLaren had wanted to take it off him in a courtroom, which is worth sitting with for a moment. A team that had been fined $100 million for something the governing body could not prove they had used, watching 2 rival teams face no penalty at all for something the governing body's own delegate had measured. That was 2007. The championship was decided by 1 point, and it very nearly was not decided on the circuit at all. So take the 2 failures in order and ask who made them. In China, a decision not to pit a driver on destroyed tires, taken by a team that afterwards stated publicly it had been managing an internal rivalry rather than racing the man who won the race. In Brazil, a gearbox failure on lap 7. Neither of those is a young driver's error. One is a pit wall call. One is a mechanical failure. What the rookie actually did wrong was slide into a gravel trap at walking pace on tires that should have been changed 20 minutes earlier, and outbrake himself at one corner while recovering from a start that had already gone badly. Those are real mistakes. They cost real points, and they are nowhere near large enough to carry the story that has been built on top of them. The lesson the sport took from 2007 was that a rookie could not close out a championship. The lesson available from 2007 is that a driver inside a team at war with itself under the largest disciplinary sanction in the sport's history, being managed against his own teammate rather than against his actual rival, lost a world championship by 1 point. Then look at what happened next. Alonso left McLaren by mutual agreement before the end of the year and returned to Renault. Heikki Kovalainen came in alongside Hamilton, quick, well-liked, and not a returning double world champion with a claim on the team. The war ended, the sanction was paid, and in 2008, the same driver at the same team, in the same colors, won the world championship on the last corner of the last lap of the last race of the season. He was still 23. He had had 1 more year of experience and 1 fewer civil war. Nothing about him had fundamentally changed. Almost everything around him had, which brings us to now. At the summer break, Kimi Antonelli leads this championship by 50 points, with 11 rounds still to run. He is 19 years old. He is in his 2nd season. If he holds it, he becomes the youngest world champion the sport has ever had by a margin of several years. The comparison to 2007 is being made constantly at the moment, and it is nearly always made badly, as a warning about young drivers under pressure. But 50 points with 11 rounds left is not 12 points with 2. And the question 2007 actually raises is not whether a 19-year-old can handle a championship lead. It is whether the team around him can. Hamilton lost 2007 because McLaren spent the closing months of that season fighting itself, fighting the governing body, and managing a rivalry instead of winning a title. Whatever happens between now and Abu Dhabi, that is the thing worth watching, not the teenager. This channel is telling the whole story of Formula One, season by season, from the beginning. 1950, 13 cars at Silverstone, and 3 teammates in the same works team fighting for a championship that had never existed before. The full grid.